Hey there. Ready to dive in. We're going to be tackling education reform today.
Yeah.
Specifically, the influence of some pretty outspoken right-wing thinkers.
Right.
You've got a stack of sources on this, so we know you're serious about getting to the bottom of it.
Absolutely.
And trust me, some of these opinions are strong.
Oh, yeah.
But don't worry, that's where you come in. You're amazing at cutting through the noise and making sense of it all.
Well, we'll try. At least I think it's definitely a conversation that we need to be having right now.
It's not just about, like, what's being taught, but, like, the entire system itself.
Yeah. And the framing of it, too.
Exactly.
So who are the big names that keep popping up in your research?
Well, three names keep popping out constantly. Christopher Rufo, Daniel Buck, and Corey DeAngelis. Each brings something a little different to the table, but they're all kind of making serious waves in this world.
Yeah.
So first up, we've got Christopher Rufo.
Okay.
If you had to put a label on him, it would be like the anti-woke warrior, right?
Mm.
He's laser-focused on rooting out what he calls left-wing indoctrination,
Mm.
especially when it comes to things like race and gender in the classroom.
Right.
And get this, your sources use the phrase weaponize the term CRT to describe his tactics.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's some pretty intense imagery, don't you think?
it is.
So he's painting this picture of schools being overrun by like these radical ideas.
It's about framing, right? Like you're talking about, it's not just about the content itself, it's about how you frame the conversation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it makes it seem so scary.
Right.
So then we have Daniel Buck.
And he seems to long for the good old days of traditional teaching.
Yeah.
Discipline core subjects, none of this like touchy-feely stuff.
Interesting.
He's basically saying like, stick to the basics, folks, and leave your social justice crusades at the door.
Yeah. So go back to the basics when things were simpler. Perhaps his argument.
Right, like less anxiety in the classroom.
Right.
So Buck's perspective seems to align with this kind of nostalgia that some people have
Okay.
for a time when education was, I guess, perceived as being more straightforward, less entangled with social and political issues.
Yeah.
And I think it raises some interesting questions about what it really means to prepare students for the real world and all of its complexities.
Right, because the world is not black and white anymore, or if it ever was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's Corey DeAngelis.
Okay.
He's coming at this from a completely different angle.
Okay. He's all about empowering parents through school choice.
Okay.
More charter schools, more vouchers. Basically, let parents vote with their feet and watch the quality go up.
Uh-huh.
Because competition breeds innovation or something like that.
Right. The free market will fix everything.
Yeah. But, you know, your sources also highlight some pretty serious concerns with that approach.
Well, of course, because it's never that simple.
Right. It's never that simple. So we've got these three figures. Rufo wants to purge the woke boogeyman.
Right.
Buck wants to go back to the good old days.
Right.
DeAngelis wants to unleash the free market on schools.
Right. Three very different approaches.
But what does all of this actually mean for students, for teachers, for the future of public education? That's what we really need to unpack
Exactly. We need to think about the long-term consequences.
of all of these different approaches.
Yes. Okay, so let's dig into this whole woke education debate a little bit more.
Okay.
Because it's something that Rufo has really made, like, his mission.
Right.
It's become such a loaded term, right?
It really has
Like
to.
almost like a catch-all phrase for anything that makes certain people uncomfortable.
Right.
But what are we really talking about here?
Yeah.
Your sources mention things like teaching about systemic racism,
Right.
exploring diverse perspectives in literature,
Okay.
even just like acknowledging that different family structures exist. Is that
Mhm.
really so radical?
Well, and who gets to decide, right? What's considered radical or what's considered just basic facts?
That's true.
And I think that's kind of a key part of this debate as well.
Yeah, and your sources talk about how Rufo has intentionally broadened the definition of CRT
Yes.
to encompass like a whole range of ideas.
Right.
Some of which are more mainstream than others.
It's a very intentional strategy.
It is. It's like this moral panic.
Yes.
This idea that kids are being indoctrinated by these like dangerous ideologies.
Right.
When in reality, a lot of these concepts are really just about promoting empathy and understanding.
Yeah, and creating a more inclusive and, I think, accurate view of history and society.
Exactly. And meanwhile, we're so caught up in this debate
Right?
that we're not really addressing the actual problems in the education system.
Exactly.
Like lack of funding, lack of resources,
Just the
teacher
pain.
burnout, all of that gets pushed aside.
Because we're busy fighting about this word
Exactly.
that has been weaponized, as
Yeah.
they say.
Right, and what is all of this doing to teachers
Right.
who are just trying to do their jobs?
Exactly.
Imagine being a teacher in a classroom
Right.
trying to have a nuanced discussion about something like,
Right.
let's say, the history of race in America.
Right.
Knowing that you have parents, administrators,
Right.
maybe even lawmakers breathing down your neck.
Accountability sounds great, but when it's used to stifle actual discussion and learning, then it becomes a problem.
It creates this impossible situation for teachers.
Yeah.
You know, they're caught between this responsibility to teach kids to think critically,
Right.
to engage with these complex issues,
Right.
but then also this fear of being accused of pushing some kind of agenda.
Exactly. And then you end up with teachers who are afraid to teach anything because they don't want to get in trouble or lose their jobs.
Exactly. And it undermines the whole purpose of education to begin with.
Right, which is to help students learn how to think for themselves.
Exactly. So then we come to DeAngelis and his solution,
Okay.
which is school choice.
Okay.
Give parents more options and let the market take care of the rest.
Let the parents be the consumers,
Yeah.
and the schools will have to compete for their business.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Schools will have to improve to attract students.
Right.
So the quality of education will magically go up.
It sounds good in theory, but it's not always that simple.
It's not. And your sources point out that
That's right.
it could actually make inequality in education even worse.
Right, because not all parents have the same resources or knowledge to make those choices.
Exactly.
Or the ability to get their kids to all these different schools, even if they could choose them.
Right. What about the families who don't have the time or the money to
Correct.
be driving their kids all over town to go to different schools?
Exactly. Or who work multiple jobs and can't attend PTA meetings.
Yes. And what about accountability?
Right.
If we're talking about using public funds to support all of these different types of schools,
Yeah, right.
shouldn't there be some kind of oversight?
Right. Oh, and that's one of the big questions about charter schools and voucher programs. Is are they subject to the same standards of accountability as traditional public schools?
Exactly. And your sources specifically mention religious schools as being a concern here
Of course.
because they might be teaching a curriculum that's biased towards a particular religious viewpoint, right? And some people might be okay with that. But not everyone is going to agree on what should be taught.
Exactly. And is that really fair to the students?
Right.
To be taught something that's not like a balanced perspective?
And again, it comes down to who gets to decide
Exactly.
what is considered a balanced perspective.
It's so complicated.
It is.
So we've got Rufo's crusade against woke ideology.
Right.
We've got DeAngelis pushing for school choice.
Right.
But then we also have to contend with Buck's vision of returning to traditional teaching.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. So we've got Rufo on his crusade against woke ideology. DeAngelis is out there pushing for school choice. But then we've got Buck.
Right.
And his vision seems to be like hitting rewind.
Yeah.
Taking us back to the classrooms of like, I don't know, the 50s or something.
Mm-hmm.
Right back to the basics when things were simpler. Or at least that's how he seems to view it.
Yeah, exactly. But is that really the answer, though?
That's the question, isn't it?
I mean, is going back to that really going to prepare students for the world today?
And I think that's a really key point that you bring up, because the workplace of today, and certainly the workplace of tomorrow, is going to demand such different skills than perhaps the workplaces of the past.
Exactly.
Right? We're talking about critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, adaptability.
Yeah.
It's not even just about the skills themselves. It's about being able to learn new skills and adapt to new situations.
Yes. And being able to think for yourself, to figure things out on your own.
Exactly. Because the world is changing so rapidly that any specific skill you learn today might be obsolete in 5 years.
Right. And on top of all of that, let's not forget about the teachers.
Oh, yeah. The teachers are the ones on the front lines of all of this.
They're the ones who are actually in the classrooms every day dealing with all of this pressure.
Absolutely. And we're asking so much of them.
Your sources really highlight the challenges that teachers are facing right now.
Right. It's low pay, it's overcrowded classrooms, it's lack of resources and support.
And now they have to deal with this like constant scrutiny and criticism.
Yes, from all sides.
About what they should be teaching, how they should be teaching it.
Exactly. It's like they're caught in the middle of this ideological battle.
And then we wonder why we have a teacher shortage.
Right. Because who would want to sign up for that?
It's like we're setting them up to fail.
In many ways we are.
So given all of this, what happens if these figures that we've been discussing...
All right, Rufo, Buck, and DeAngelis?
Yes. What happens if they get what they want?
Right. What does that mean for the future of education?
What does the future of public education look like in that scenario?
Right. And I think that's where we have to look at the potential consequences, both positive and negative.
Your sources paint a pretty stark picture of what could happen.
Yeah, it's not a rosy picture.
Not at all. It sounds like we could end up with a situation where the achievement gap between students
Right.
just gets wider and wider.
Exactly. Because if you have affluent families who are able to take advantage of school choice,
Right.
they're going to be able to send their kids to schools that are better funded,
Yeah.
that align with their values.
Right. And everyone else is going to be stuck with whatever's left over.
Exactly. And those schools are likely to be under-resourced and understaffed.
And then it becomes this vicious cycle.
Right, because then the quality of education suffers even more, and it just perpetuates the cycle of inequality.
It's not just about the resources, though, right?
No, absolutely not.
It's also about what is actually being taught in these schools.
Exactly.
If we're silencing certain voices, if we're only teaching one perspective on history,
Right.
if we're discouraging kids from thinking critically about the world around them.
Right, if we're just trying to create a bunch of robots
Yeah.
who will blindly follow orders.
Exactly. What does that mean for the future of our democracy?
It's a scary thought, isn't it?
It is, because public education is supposed to be the cornerstone of a functioning democracy.
Right, it's about creating informed, engaged citizens.
People who can think for themselves, who can participate in a democratic society.
Exactly, people who will question things, who will challenge the status quo.
Right. So as we kind of come to the end of this deep dive,
Yeah,
I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is, what do we value most in education?
that's a big question.
It is. Is it about churning out obedient workers?
Right, or is it about something more than that?
Is it about teaching kids to conform?
Right,
Or is it about teaching them to think for themselves?
and to think critically about the world around them.
Exactly.
And maybe even to change the world.
Exactly. And to make it a better place.
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're important ones.
They are, and I think they're questions that we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And until next time, stay curious.